This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that watched a lot of halftime blowouts this week. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. Like most shows, we're going to get right into the action here with some meet recaps. The first meet to look at is TCU at SMU. This was going to be a rematch of the meet that kicked off the whole season. I thought the Mustangs were going to win by about 5. Let's see what really happened. The day started off with fences. That went 4-1 for SMU. Then we had horsemanship over in the Western Ring, and that went 5-0 for SMU. So they got the sweep there. That made the halftime score 9-1. Big lead for SMU. Looking pretty one-sided here. Could the Frogs make a comeback? Well, we don't normally see that with a score like this at half. Here's what happened in the second half. Flat went 3-1 for SMU, and Reining went 3-2 for SMU. So, the Mustangs won everything. I mean, when you win all your events, there's at least a 60% chance you're going to win the meet that way. So SMU wins this one. 15-4 was the total score there. They left no doubt. With this meet, SMU has established that everything you saw with all those losses they were picking up earlier, probably more because they were on the road than any lack of quality on the Mustangs' part. And now they've had a home and home with TCU. They narrowly lost when they were at TCU, and then they just demolished them at home. So that suggests that they're probably better than TCU right now. But again, I don't want to suggest that TCU is not a great team. They do have some work to do, but especially on the western side of things. But they're undefeated at home, and as long as that holds out, they're still a contender for the national championship. Next meet to look at, South Carolina at Texas A&M. I thought the Aggies were going to get this win probably by about 5 or 6 points. Let's see what really happened. Flat went 4-1 for Texas A&M, and Reining went 5-0 for Texas A&M. So we had a 9-1 halftime lead. Again, very hard to come back from that, especially when you're on the road. I don't think it's ever happened. So over we go to the second half. Fences went 3-1 for Texas A&M. Horsemanship went 5-0 for Texas A&M. That gave us a final score of 17-2. Big home win for the Aggies. They remain one of the top teams in the nation. They were good at everything in Friday, but the sweep of an entire discipline in Western like that is just next level domination. So good job to the Western riders over at Texas A&M. For the Gamecocks, they had a hot start to the season, but that's cooled off now. There's still lots of riding ahead of them, and they shouldn't be too worried about giving up a road meet. Eventually, every team in the nation is going to have some road losses, so basically just move on, get ready for the next meet. The next meet we're going to look at is Baylor at Oklahoma State. Now, the Bears hadn't ridden a lot, so we weren't quite sure what we were going to get, but I did think this was going to be a win for the Cowgirls, probably 5 or 6 points. Here's what happened. The day started out with fences. That went 4-1 for Oklahoma State. Reining was also going on. That went 3-1 for Oklahoma State. So, home team was up 7-2 at the half. Again, looks like it's going to be another blowout. Then in the second half, we had the flat. That was a tie, 2-2. And then horsemanship went 3-2 for Oklahoma State. That made a final score of 12-6, home win for the Cowgirls. Wasn't as big of a blowout as some of the other meets that were going on, but still big win for Oklahoma State. The 4-1 victory over fences is what really got everything going. And I'll tell you that Oklahoma State, that they are winning the meets that they need to win to stay in the hunt for another conference championship, and they're also improving their national resume. So good job to them. For Baylor, this road loss isn't that bad. They've only been on the road so far. Most teams would not be able to get a win in Stillwater. And they did get the final score within 6 after that disastrous first half. So that's something that they can take away from this one. All right, those were meets that happened on Friday. Now let's go over to Saturday. Auburn at UT Martin. I thought Auburn was going to take care of business, probably win by about 5 points or so. Let's see what happened. Everything started off with fences. Auburn won that one 4-1. And then horsemanship was also going on. Auburn won that 3-2. So that made the halftime score 7-3. So the Tigers are in control there. Last year they had some trouble with UT Martin. Didn't have this big of a lead at halftime, so things were looking better for Auburn. Then in the flat, that went 4-1 for Auburn, and Reining also went 3-2 for Auburn. So that made the final score 14-6 Auburn. And yeah, the Tigers never trailed. Like I mentioned before, they did have a little bit of trouble with UT Martin last season, but they had no troubles on Saturday. So Auburn is also winning the meets that they have to do, and they're getting some style point meets as well. So we're going to find out a little bit more about Auburn when they go to Oklahoma State next week, but right now, Auburn looks like the real deal. For UT Martin, they did their best. Even at home, beating one of these top teams is probably a little too tough to ask of them. We saw them fall at home to Oklahoma State recently, and now it's happened again with Auburn. We kind of expected that, but still good job, good season going for them overall. And we also have a single discipline meet to look at this week, Dartmouth at Sacred Heart. Now the Green came out hot on this one. They won fences 4-1, so they had a nice lead. Maybe this was going to be another blowout, but the Pioneers flipped things in the second half and made it close. The meet actually came down to the final ride. The Pioneers took flat 3-2, but that last point did go to Dartmouth. That prevent this from being a tie, needing a tiebreaker, although I will say that Sacred Heart did have a 0 in one of their fences rides, so they probably won't go and get it anyway. Still, you don't ever want to go to a tiebreaker. You want to just win it. That's what Dartmouth did. So good win for Dartmouth. They went on the road. They got a win against a quality opponent here, and they may be the second best team in the nation right now. They're undefeated, so we're not really sure how they'll match up against Charleston, but we're going to find out. But that's later. For Sacred Heart, they've suffered a bit from starting their season so much later than everybody else. It's kind of taken them a little bit to get in a groove. We'll keep an eye on them, see how things go as they progress. Well, that's all of this week's meet, so now let's take a look at the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. First, we're going to do the dual discipline teams. Number 1 is Auburn. The Tigers are 4-0 with a pair of home wins over TCU and SMU. They also have a pair of road wins over South Carolina and UT Martin. The schedule is going to get a little tougher next week, but for right now, Auburn is the best team in the nation. Number 2 is Texas A&M. The Aggies are 3-1 with home wins over SMU and South Carolina, a road win over Delaware State, and a tiebreaker loss at Georgia. I have bumped them up to number 2 basically because of TCU's loss that they had at SMU. Speaking of which, number 3 is SMU. The Mustangs finally rode at home, and they made the most out of it. They beat TCU convincingly, and they showed that those 3 road losses are not really the best indicator of how good they are. As I keep saying, pretty much every team in the nation would lose at TCU, at Auburn, and at Texas A&M. They did win at Georgia, and now they handled TCU at home, and so that's probably a better picture of what SMU can do. Number 4 is TCU. The Horned Frogs are 5-2 with home wins over SMU, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. They have road wins over Georgia and Fresno State. Their 2 losses are both on the road at Auburn and at SMU. Now basically you could make a case for any of the 3 Texas teams that aren't named Baylor to just be ranked anywhere from number 2 to number 4 right now. I have TCU at number 4 right now, but they're probably good enough to be ranked anywhere in the top 4 once we get some more meets and we can see how teams are doing both on the road and at home. Number 5 is Oklahoma State. Yeehaw! The Cowgirls are 3-1 with road wins over UC Davis and UT Martin and a home win over Baylor. Their only loss was on the road at TCU. The Cowgirls are a good team and could also be ranked anywhere in the top 5 right now. We just don't know enough about everybody. Number 6 is Georgia. Georgia's home win over Texas A&M wasn't pretty, but it still counts. The win brings them up to 1-2 with 2 home losses to TCU and SMU. They barely avoided an 0-3 start this season, but now the schedule is going to get tougher as they hit the road. The Bulldogs seem to be a decent team, but they're just underperforming right now. Number 7 is Fresno State. The Bulldogs are 3-1 with road wins over South Dakota State and UT Martin and UC Davis, and they have a home loss to TCU. They've proven better than the smaller dual discipline teams, but they really need some wins over the name brand opponents to kind of climb higher in the rankings. Number 8 is South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 2-2 with 2 road wins over Minnesota Crookston and Delaware State. Their 2 losses were at home to Auburn and on the road at Texas A&M. It's tough to tell just how good Carolina is right now, but the upcoming home meet against Georgia should let us know. Number 9 is UT Martin. The Skyhawks dropped to 2-3 with a home loss to Auburn. They also have a home loss to Oklahoma State and a road loss to Fresno State. To balance those out, they have a road win at South Dakota State and a home win over UC Davis. The Skyhawks are probably the best team in the ECAC this year, but they still look to be a fair distance below the larger dual discipline teams. And number 10 is Baylor. We don't know enough about the Bears, but what we do know isn't outstanding. They're 0-2 with road losses at TCU and Oklahoma State, but most teams would probably lose those, so I'm going to give them some benefit of the doubt here. We're going to learn more about the Bears in the upcoming home meet against Fresno State. Now let's look at the single discipline rankings. Number 1 is Sweetbriar. The Vixens are 2-0 with a road win at Swanee and a home win over Charleston. They're about to travel to Lynchburg, so that meet will either crystallize what we think we know about the top single discipline teams, or it's going to throw everything into chaos. Should be fun either way. Number 2 is College of Charleston. The Cougars are 2-1 with road wins over Centenary and Lynchburg and a road loss at Sweetbriar. Charleston's meet at Dartmouth will be a big opportunity for them to hold on to this number 2 ranking. And number 3 is Dartmouth. The Green are 2-0 with road wins over Swanee and Sacred Heart, and the aforementioned home meet against Charleston is their opportunity to climb even higher in the rankings. Number 4 is Swanee. The Tigers are 1-2 with a road loss at Dartmouth, a home loss to Sweetbriar, but a home win over Lynchburg. Swanee might not be the best team in the nation, but they are definitely in the conversation for returning to Ocala right now. Number 5 is Lynchburg. The Hornets are 2-2 with a home loss to Charleston, a road loss at Swanee, and a pair of home wins over Centenary and Bridgewater. That's not an impressive resume, so Lynchburg is under a lot of pressure to win with number 1 Sweetbriar coming to town. Number 6 is Centenary.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
The Cyclones are 1-1, losing at Lynchburg, but beating Bridgewater at a neutral site. They look to be a decent team, but to be considered for the national championship tournament, they're really going to have to do well when Lynchburg comes to town in another week and a half. Number 7 is Sacred Heart. The Pioneers are 0-1, losing to Dartmouth at home this week. But if they can do better against visiting Charleston this week, that will go a long way towards improving their national reputation. Number 8 is Berry. Wherefore art thou, Vikings? Berry still hasn't ridden, so they could be the best team in the nation, the worst, or anywhere in between. We're just going to keep waiting to find out which. And number 9 is Bridgewater. The Eagles are 0-2 with a home loss to Centenary and a road loss at Lynchburg. They'll travel to Centenary in another week, so until they show us something different, they're going to stay at number 9. And those are the rankings. Now let's turn our attention to the future and take a look at some meet previews. First up on Friday, we've got UC Davis at South Dakota State. This is going to be a nice opportunity for both of these teams. If the Jackrabbits can get the home win, it'll show that they are contenders in the ECAC. If the Aggies can get this road win, they're going to be just behind UT Martin in the conference race. These two teams are close in their returning talent, so once again, I'm going to go with the home team, South Dakota State, by 1 point. Next, let's take a look at TCU at Texas A&M. TCU continues the road portion of their schedule with a trip to College Station. This one is probably going to go a little bit like their trip to SMU did. I expect A&M to win this one, and maybe by about a bit. We're going to see quite a few of these non-conference home and home meets this year where they trade off, and I think it's great because it really gives us an opportunity to see how each team does on their own horses versus other people's horses. So I think the Aggies are going to get this win probably by about 5-6 points. Auburn at Oklahoma State. Well, once again, we've got two fairly close teams, and I think we're going to see the home team prevail. Auburn leads in most of the stats, but I really expect that the Cowgirls are going to ride better at home, and for them to beat Auburn, they're going to have to do well in fences and horsemanship, because they've been doing well in those two recently, so if they can steal those points away from Auburn, that's really going to undercut what the Tigers try to do in most meets, and if Oklahoma State wins those two events, then I think they're going to beat Auburn. I think they're going to prevail by about 1 or 2 points. Georgia at South Carolina. Now this one is very interesting. Georgia looks to be much better according to the stats, but they haven't done very well so far this season, and I think that home advantage is going to be pretty significant. We're seeing some of the top teams get these wins on the road, but right now I think the Gamecocks are going to win this one at home, probably by about 1 or 2, maybe 3 points. Minnesota Crookston versus UC Davis. Now, this is going to be a tall order for the Golden Eagles. UC Davis is having a down year so far, but they should still be able to win this meet, even at a neutral site, even if it's 4-on-4, which is going to help Crookston a little bit, but I think the Aggies are still going to win this one by about 10 points, probably. And then our last Friday meet is Fresno State at Baylor. Now, this is another interesting one. We know Fresno State has improved this season, and we think that Baylor has improved. Based on the stats, Fresno State is probably going to be the better team, but this is a home meet for Baylor, and I'm going to pick the Bears to win by 1 point. Over we go to Saturday, Minnesota Crookston at South Dakota State. Here, I think the Jackrabbits are going to get a win. I think Minnesota Crookston has improved a bit this year, but they're still behind their other ECAC peers. My prediction is South Dakota State by about 10 points. College of Charleston at Dartmouth. Okay, so just how good is College of Charleston? They did shock the world with their season opening win at Lynchburg, then they lost at Sweetbriar, but they seem good enough to get a win over Dartmouth. With this being in New Hampshire, though, I'm going to go with the green in a close one, probably by about 2 points. And over we go to Sunday, Charleston at Sacred Heart. According to the NCEA schedule, after riding at Dartmouth on Saturday, Charleston's going to travel about 3 hours down to Sacred Heart, and they're going to ride on Sunday. This meet presents the same questions as the previous one, but in this one, I think I'm going to predict a win by Charleston. The Cougars, they have the talent, and we still have a lot of unknowns for the Pioneers, so until Sacred Heart gets a win, I'm thinking Charleston's going to win this one by 1 or 2 points. So that's this week's show. Yeah, lots going on. Pretty exciting. More and more pictures of how good teams are is starting to come clearer into focus. A lot of teams had early on mostly road meets or mostly home, and it's really tough to gauge who's better, who's not, when you're not looking at an even playing field like that. But now that we're starting to see these teams go on the other end of a home and home or start to go on the road against a good opponent, we're starting to see, okay, just how good is this team. I expect next week we're going to have an even better picture of how good all these teams are. And yeah, this is exactly what you want out of your season. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much for listening, and War Horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.